what I have to say here isn't addressed to those who still back Israel's slaughter of Gaza. If at this point, having watched 21 weeks of Palestinians being butchered through bombs, bullets, starvation, the destruction of their healthcare system, the lack of shelter, fresh water, we really could go on. If you're still supporting this in any way, I got to be frank, I just consider you to be beyond morally depraved at this point. After all, I'm not going to start doing videos aimed at convincing cheerleaders of Pol Pot, and the same principle applies. Now I know some are going to flinch at that comparison. Well, as I'll explain, it is entirely valid. This is addressed to those who are silent, those who aren't speaking out except for some occasional hand-wringing, that this is oh so bleak, how sad, how tragic. What I mean is the failure to call this out for what it is, which is one of the great crimes of our age, a crime directly facilitated by our governments, who provide the weapons, aid, and diplomatic and political support to make it possible, and a crime scene which is covered in the bloodied fingertips of most Western media outlets, who've played a pivotal role in justifying or whitewashing Israeli crimes, and therefore discouraging the public from placing pressure on our rulers to make this stop. My question at this point is, what does it take? Really, what does it take? Since the horror began, I've been using Twitter to quote tweet certain horrors, only a tiny fraction of the actual horrors, and as I do, I add the comment, don't look away. Some examples: Israeli soldiers clutching an Israeli flag as a drone camera zooms out, showing the total destruction of Gaza. The story of a family in which Israeli soldiers stormed in, shot dead the father as he waved a white flag, then threw a grenade which injured the mother and a disabled 5-year-old boy who had cerebral palsy, lodging a fragment in his brain and then shot dead the mother. A mother who spent 8 years trying to conceive only for her precious 4-month-old baby to be killed, along with 21 others when an Israeli missile hit a building, along with 14 other children. 2 doctors choking back tears as they receive phone calls informing them their entire families have been wiped out in Israeli missile strikes. An Israeli soldier blowing up the only cancer hospital in Gaza and posting it on social media with the caption, "The hospital accidentally broke." A 6-year-old boy who attempted suicide by lying under a truck after his family were killed, only to die of hypothermia. A doctor operating on a 1-year-old boy, his right arm and right leg blown off by a bomb, with a blood-stained diaper that still remained, but no leg below. I could go on. Why do I write "Don't Look Away"? Because sometimes when terrible atrocities happen, some claim I wasn't to know. If only I knew. That excuse has to be taken away. Yes, much of our media is disguising the true scale of this crime, but social media allows so many horrors to be seen and understood. This has been called the first live-stream genocide in history for a reason. And the brutal truth is, if you are silent, you do know. Well, you know enough. You know terrible evil is being committed against huge numbers of innocent people. Now, some of those who look away do so because they can't emotionally tolerate things like suffering. That is more than understandable. But some of those looking away, if that's you, you're doing it because you feel shame, because you know you've not spoken out when you could have done so. That's why I ask people not to look away. Indeed, these crimes are being committed by soldiers who feel they have impunity, that they can do what they want, commit atrocities, no matter how extreme, and get away with virtually anything. And that silence is what allows them to get away with it. So why the silence? If that's you, what's your excuse? Now, you may respond, but there are so many horrors in a world defined by so much pain. Why berate me for this horror in particular? Now, that is not an unreasonable point. But firstly, crucially, this is a horror which directly implicates our governments. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is brutal, murderous even. It's not backed around by our governments or cheered on by our media outlets. But what about then, say, Yemen? The Saudi-led onslaught against Yemen is armed and backed by the West, and an estimated 377,000 have been killed there, a far greater number than those so far killed in Gaza. Well, those making this argument have generally never said anything about Yemen, and have only Googled it in an attempt to undermine the worth of Palestinian lives, rather than because they care in any meaningful way about Yemeni lives. And look, I'm not writing my own reviews here, or patting myself on the back. This shows what a damning indictment it is of the British media. But no other British columnist has written more about the war in Yemen. That's a fact. Believe me, I've checked. I've even done a documentary about the war in a Yemeni refugee camp. It's an issue I happen to care deeply about. It's the only time I've cried on camera. Yemen is itself a horror which underlines the horror of Gaza. Now, when I told you that horrific death toll, and it is horrific, 377,000, bear in mind, Yemen's population is 15 times greater than that of Gaza, and those deaths were over 7 years, not over 5 months. That's the equivalent, if you adjust for population, of 25,000 Palestinians in Gaza being killed, a death toll that Gaza surpassed a long time ago. So already a much higher proportion of Palestinians have been killed in a much shorter space of time. It gets worse. A new study suggests that without a ceasefire, and if there's an escalation with epidemics, for example, an escalation that involves the storming of Rafah, then about 5.5% of Gaza's population will be killed by August. That means in the first 10 months of this horror, 1 in every 18 or so Palestinians in Gaza will be killed. And after that, people will still continue to die, whether because of continued violence, a destroyed healthcare system combined with the spread of disease, hunger, lack of fresh water, and so on. That would not be the final death toll or anything like it. Which is why I made the seemingly outrageous comparison with the Khmer Rouge at the beginning, because in that case, around 20% of Cambodia's population are believed to have been killed because of Pol Pot's regime. But over the space of around 4 years, in this case, we're talking about 5.5% potentially in 10 months. Now, as for Ukraine, it has a population 20 times greater than that of Gaza. Now, if we adjust for population, the death toll in Gaza would be the equivalent of over 750,000 Ukrainians being killed. Nobody suggested a death toll of anything like that in Ukraine. Indeed, what we're talking about there is a war which has gone on for much, much longer. Even if we look at the estimates, the official UN estimate is that over 10,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed. That is likely to be an underestimate, by the way. But nobody is suggesting anything like 750,000 Ukrainians have been killed, even if you include the 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers officially declared to have been killed. Now, if you've spoken out about what Russia has done in Ukraine, and I hope you have, it's important doing so because it's morally the right thing to do. Not because it's courageous. You're just echoing the official line of your government and your country's media outlets. You're not doing so either because it will make any practical difference. There's no arms sales to stop to Russia. Indeed, the West is arming Ukraine. There are already huge sanctions which have been taken. So the situation couldn't be any different. Here's another reason, if you're silent, that is worth considering. Maybe it's because you think, however horrific this might be, Hamas started it. Now, let's be clear, Hamas and other armed groups committed unjustifiable war crimes on the 7th of October last year. A total of 1,105 Israeli civilians, soldiers, police officers, emergency service workers, as well as foreign workers are believed to have been killed that day. Of those, 792 are believed to be civilians. Now, starting the clock on that day, however bleak and horrific that day was, is an affront to history as well as moral decency. It removes generations of horrors committed against Palestinians, simply erases them. Going back to the 1948 Nakba, or catastrophe, when perhaps 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes, with an estimated 15,000 suffering terrible, violent deaths, or the ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands more in 1967, as well as illegal occupation, the longest siege in history against Gaza, what is defined by multiple human rights organisations as apartheid, the illegal theft of land, colonisation with illegal settlements, mass incarceration, thousands detained without charge, subjected to terrible violence, including children who, according to the NGO Save the Children, suffer physical and sexual abuse in Israeli custody. Last year alone, before the 7th of October, an estimated 240 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank, including dozens of children. Now, if those had been Israelis killed by Palestinian militants, would anyone be calling that a ceasefire? Of course they wouldn't. And that itself underlines just how little worth is attached to the lives of Palestinians. Furthermore, if you look at between 2008 and the 6th of October 2023, 96% of those killed were Palestinian. And we're talking about thousands of people. Now, what about the claim that, well, Hamas killed deliberately and Israel don't? The deaths may be unfortunate, but in the case of Israel, they weren't intentional. Now, firstly, look up the Daher Doctrine, developed by Israel in the 2006 invasion of Lebanon. That specifies using military force against a civilian population in order to achieve a political goal. That is, for them then to put pressure on Hamas or Hezbollah to cease fighting. That is, the use of violence against civilians to achieve a political goal. That is terrorism. Now, read A Mass Assassination Factory in Plus 972 magazine, an Israeli-Palestinian publication that I really must recommend. It's based on briefings from Israeli intelligence sources, which make clear that the number of acceptable civilian losses per alleged military target has gone from dozens to hundreds. Now, there were also multiple reports from Gaza of innocent people being deliberately killed in repeated massacres. And frankly, given the astronomical death toll in Gaza, what does Israel does not intentionally kill civilians even mean? The claims about human shields, debunked in previous conflicts in Gaza by independent human rights organisations in any case, makes no sense when the equivalent in tons of explosives of several nuclear bombs has been dropped on an area the size of East London. Perhaps you'll say, but Hamas atrocities were worse. What does that even mean at this point? The atrocities in Gaza include, let's just give some examples, a car with 7 innocent civilians, 4 of them children, being fired on by Israeli forces, with a 15-year-old girl desperately ringing the Palestine Red Crescent, begging for help, before you hear her being slaughtered on the phone. Then a 6-year-old girl in that car, Hind Rajab, ringing, again, desperately scared, an ambulance sent to rescue her. Its arrival coordinated with the Israeli military, before it too was blown apart by Israeli forces, killing both paramedics. It includes children aged 5 to 8 arriving in hospitals with sniper bullets to their heads. It includes multiple reports of Palestinians being run over alive by tanks and bulldozers. It includes every single hospital in Gaza being attacked, with the healthcare system virtually non-functional, with massacres of doctors, nurses, patients. It includes entire bloodlines being wiped from the face of the earth. It includes the biggest mass killing of journalists or aid workers in any conflict in recorded history. It includes reports of Palestinian women being sexually assaulted and raped by Israeli soldiers. It includes newborn babies being slaughtered. It includes Israeli soldiers posting their war crimes for comic amusement on TikTok, rejoicing as they blow up hospitals and homes and universities, screaming genocidal rhetoric, or posing with the stolen possessions of those they've displaced or maimed or killed. Children's bicycles, children's toys, the walking canes of the disabled and elderly, women's underwear. You are horrified, rightly, and you should have been, by the 36 Israeli children killed on 7th of October. Where does that leave more than 13,000 Palestinian children? The biggest mass slaughter of children in a conflict for a long time. Is this a tragedy or is it a crime? Choose your answer carefully. These atrocities are some of the worst committed in the 21st century. If any of these examples I've cited from Gaza had been committed by Hamas, there wouldn't be a debate about that point. But then we hear, but Hamas will do this all over again. Firstly, do you really think Israel would make the same mistake it made before the 7th of October, of believing it had turned Gaza into a sealed tomb from which no one would ever escape, thus leaving its southern communities to their fate? And do you really think that the lives of Palestinians have equal worth to those of Israelis, yes or no? This is the ultimate test. In absolute times, around 38 times as many Palestinians have now been killed as the total killed on the 7th of October. But in proportionate terms, when you reflect for population size, that's 137 October the 7th against Gaza. Do you really think there's even the remotest possibility of that number of Israeli civilians ever being killed again by Hamas? Or even close, not least after Israel doesn't take the security itself for granted or even close? And what do you think the consequences will be of slaughtering so many people? Of so many people losing their loved ones in unbearable situations? Of seeing untold, unspeakable horrors being committed by the Israeli state, by the Western allies? What do you think that's going to do to the survivors? Do you think it's going to make them want to accept living in peace? Or do you think it's going to make some of them want to fight back? I think we all know the answer. Now, perhaps you fear being attacked, defamed and threatened. It makes sense. I can speak from personal experience. People are constantly trying to get me fired and deplatformed. And those with a public platform who've spoken out against this obscenity have been attacked. Perhaps you specifically think you'll be accused of being an anti-Semite. Well, are you? Are you prejudiced against Jewish people? I ask because anti-Semitism is an evil. It has to be fought, and we all need to be conscious of our prejudices, even if we're sometimes not even aware of them. If you know that the answer is no, if you know that objecting to the mass slaughter of innocent people comes from a place of humanity, of solidarity, of compassion, of love, not hate for anybody else, then have the confidence. Speak out against this atrocity and speak out against anti-Semitism whenever you see it. The point is, throughout history, there have been so many times when people feared speaking out against terrible evil. But how do you see them? Hand on heart, how do you judge them? Do you want to be those people? And this is where I must end, because you will be aware of terrible evils committed throughout history. And you may have wondered, how were they possible? But you know that it's not a case of hindsight, that it must have been clear at the time that those horrors were being committed. So you ask yourself, how are these horrors possible, these evils? And if you're silent today on Gaza, then I've got to answer that question. It was because of you. It was because of you, of people like you, Not those who actively cheered on those horrors enthusiastically, or not just them, but those who knew in their hearts that this was wrong, who refused to speak out and do anything about it. And so whether countless Palestinians now live or die, well, their fate is in the hands of those who remain silent. If you speak out and you encourage others to speak out, that will bring huge pressure on our governments who arm and support Israel. If that pressure is strong enough, then our rulers will have to pull the plug, and that will be the day that Israel can no longer commit these terrible crimes. It's over to you, the silent. Those who claim it's oh so complicated, it seems so difficult and fraught, or that I'm scared that I'll be denounced. Life or death on a colossal scale, unimaginable suffering, sickening crimes. What happens next? That's up to you. Please like and subscribe. Do share this video. Keep the show on the road on patreon.com/OwenJones84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.